Hello.
Hello, Jane. How
Hi.
so happy you're with us today. Thank you.
My pleasure.
It's evening for you in the UK, and we are right away automatically. We jump in and we're live on YouTube just as soon as we start. So I just wanted to alert you to that um, we're ready to go. Hopefully, you've had a wonderful day. Thank you for bringing that extra energy and joining us in this late hour for you. I really appreciate you being
You're
here.
welcome. It's a real pleasure to be here with you, Mike. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. You know, you do so much work with individuals and teams. And, it was really fun to hear Bob speak today about the experience he had in the European tour that you guided him on or were with him throughout that, what he said, 15 events in 5 days. It was, quite a whirlwind. And so I know that you have all of that depth of experience of seeing people respond to this new messaging, what is possible, and truly bringing that ideal that everybody matters and the leadership that serves everyone. And you bring that teaching into your work, Jane. You bring that deep listening practice, the thinking environment, truly the tools and the methods that are going to help us evolve into a better state of experiencing business, but certainly then leading business. And I wanted to shape all of those wonderful pieces up because it expresses why I'm so excited to have you here with us today. And then also thank you because as you've hosted our conversations in the Humans First calls on Mondays at noon UK time, it's just so engaging, right? You bring me into that environment so well as a participant, and and help everybody express and share and explore with an open mind, and it's just such a gift. And so that's my gratitude, my thanks to you, and then how excited I am to have you share with the community today some of that brilliance that you take leaders and teams through as you do the work.
Well, Mike, thank you. And I would love just to appreciate you too. We've spoken before how, and I think Gary mentioned it earlier, and Melissa too, in terms of, the work that you do, a real catalyst for this kind of human connection and bringing people together to think for themselves, to be themselves, to be their best selves. And I think it's an incredible community that you have created and, for all of us to benefit from. So, it's a real privilege for me to be part of it as well.
Thank you very much. It's an open invitation that we all hold for each other and those that want to just come with curiosity, right? And I think that's so wonderful is how you and the many that are with us today have that capacity to hold space for other people. It really um, it's a gift to be surrounded with so many wonderful people. So thank you for that, Jane. Um, and then I want to kind of step out of the way and allow you the opportunity to share some of that goodness with our audience today.
Okay,
If you're ready to go, thank you very much. I really appreciate you, Jane.
my pleasure. Well, thank you so much for all of those listening today. And one of the things or several things that have been on my mind recently, in fact, are some questions that I've been wondering about. The questions for me that are arising right now are, what are some of the behaviors that you might be observing others during this crisis? And what are some of the hopes, or what do you hope some of the changes that will be sustained as a result of this crisis? in making our world a better place? And another question that's on my mind is, for me and for others, you know, what do you want to be remembered for as we emerge or re-emerge from this crisis? And as I began reflecting on those questions, it made me think about what I've noticed for myself with the clients I'm working with right now, the community that I'm involved in, and actually being with my family, you know, the four of us living here together, navigating, being together all of the time, both working and studying in the same home, which I'm very grateful for, but it's unusual to be together in such proximity for all of the time. And so what I wanted to share with you today is some of my observations, and hopefully to inspire you to think about how you might show up, and indeed would like to show up and be remembered for, as we re-emerge from this crisis. So I guess I'd like to begin with, you know, what I'm observing from a government perspective. We see they're focusing on policies and putting some amazing grants together to really support those businesses who are struggling at this time. We see organisations also looking at some policies and putting new structures in place for people to work easily in their home environment. And what I'd like to focus on today is the human behaviours that I've noticed. And in particular, to say that what I've noticed right now, and I'm going to invite some of you to share in the comments, what are you noticing around the behaviours that you're noticing in others? For me, it's been about an increase in compassion, how leaders are really raising their game, the ones that I'm working with right now, in terms of their communication, with honesty, with transparency, and being willing to be vulnerable, to ensure that their team members are safe and well and have what they need in order to perform the work that they need to and want to perform, so that they can contribute. I'm also noticing others being creative, a creativity that enables some solutions and innovation that, you know, we hadn't thought possible before. I'm reminded of Dyson in terms of how they repurpose their manufacturing to manufacture PPE equipment for our frontline workers. I'm remembering this wonderful 9-year-old girl who learnt how to use the 3D printer from her grandparents' printing company in order, again, to make the masks for the doctors and nurses. And of course, I'm also noticing courage, the courage of people, not only our frontline workers, those in the hospitals, but also those who are serving us right now in our communities, whether they be care workers or whether they be those in the shops. But as I reflected on these, I thought about, you know, what is it that these behaviours all have in common? Well, it'll be no surprise to you that for me, the underlying skill is the capacity to listen. And Gary early generously mentioned the term of generative listening. And for me, there are many different modes of listening, from active listening, reflective listening, empathetic listening, and generative listening. And this is what I want to share with you today. My message to you is that, in my experience, listening is one of the most valuable gifts we can give one another. And it's what people want more than ever right now. And so just backing up on my journey, I've been very privileged to work in a people-focused role for over 30 years now. The first 15 of those were in a corporate environment in the City of London, working in frontline businesses in financial and professional services. And after the birth of our first daughter, I set up my own coaching practice, and for the next 10 years studied and became a professional coach with the ICF. And after 10 years of coaching, I discovered the work of Nancy Klein of Time to Think and the Thinking Environment. And it was Nancy's work that transformed my life as a parent, as a daughter, as a wife, and my coaching practice. And it was Nancy's work that really helped me learn and discover what generative listening was all about. And so this is the journey I'd love to take you on briefly today. Are you up for joining me? Okay, so what is it, I wonder, do you think, that often gets in the way of us listening generatively? Well, perhaps let me start with, what do I mean by generative listening? Well, generative listening is a way of listening that generates the best thinking in others, which leads to the best performance. And I loved what Melissa was saying earlier about the way our brain works and what we've observed in being a thinking environment. It's around the way we behave around one another that allows those connections in the brain that Melissa was talking about to fire more easily and more creatively, with more courage, that enables us to think well for ourselves. And what that needs is a generative listening to help that along the way. And so generative listening enables people to think well for themselves with rigor, with courage and imagination. It allows for great decision making. It allows for people to perform at their best. And it allows for deeper, more meaningful relationships, because it says you matter. So what I'd like to do now is just to check in with you. So I wonder, when was the last time you assessed your listening habits? Now, forgive me if you've done this already today. I wondered, though, if you'd be up for doing this with me. I have just 3 questions that I'd love to ask you. Now, the answers to these questions are simply always, sometimes, or never. So join me in the comments section as I ask these questions. Are you going to answer always, sometimes, or never? So the first question is, do you find yourselves interrupting others once you've got the gist of what they're saying? Number 2, do you find yourselves finishing another sentence because you believe you know what they're about to say? And number 3, do you listen simply waiting to reply for your turn to speak? So we're going to come back to those in a moment. But first of all, I wonder if we might engage in the thinking around, what is the impact of listening generatively? Why should we do it? In my experience, it's a skill worth mastering because it impacts the way people feel and what they then go and do. So I'd love to break down now 3 different groups of people where generative listening has a huge impact on the lives of others. Firstly, the leaders in our communities, in our organizations. So when listening generatively, for leaders, it helps them to develop trust and respect of their team members. It also mitigates that feeling of being alone, because great leaders, in my experience, are great listeners. When they reach out to their team members to find out what they need, what their aspirations are, perhaps their frustrations. And so I'd love just to give you a brief example of a client of mine that I've been working with recently who was really struggling to engage with his team. They weren't contributing very effectively in meetings. And so through our coaching, we talked about this idea of listening generatively. And what would it be like if he was simply to ask his team members how they were feeling at the beginning of a meeting? And at first he said, I'm a bit uncomfortable with that. I'm not sure I want the response. And that's interesting for me because often people are fearful of asking a question around feeling because they're fearful of how to respond to that. But a simple question for a check-in as a tip here for leaders, maybe simply, is what's working well for you? Or simply, how do you feel currently? In just a word or a phrase. And it's not that you're looking to solve that, but what we're looking to do is to create a connection with somebody that in the meeting is that example, to engage with team members early on. Because what we know is that people don't really feel that they have arrived at any meeting until they've spoken. So this is a great way to connect with team members, to ask the question, and then most importantly, then to listen. The second group I'd like to think about now in terms of generative listening, where does it really show up, is parents. Some of you, I hope, listening can relate to this, or if not, will know of other family members that you connect with on a regular basis. So for me, generative listening as a parent The impact it has is that it reduces misunderstandings, it resolves conflict, and importantly, it creates opportunities for growth. And so for me, in my experience, I'd love to share another example, more personal this time. It's with my daughter who's studying at home right now. She's in her final year of school and is in that kind of uneasy situation of waiting for her grades to be calculated and yet still attending online classes, but not really knowing why and what those extra classes and work will go towards, given apparently the grades are already being calculated. And so she came to me the other day and said, "Mum, I'm super frustrated. We have got yet another essay to write by the end of this week. Do you know that's 4 essays now?" That was the moment for me to close my laptop, give my attention, and help her think through that frustration so that she could move to a better place. And the third group I'd like to talk to you about, I'll share with you the impact of generative listening, are team members or other family members, where it often improves confidence and self-esteem because it evolves, if you like, more creative and more innovative work. An example might be, for example, a team member comes up to you and says, "You know, I'm really struggling right now balancing my work and home because quite frankly, there are no boundaries anymore. I'm working in my home, trying to make it work." And so as a parent or as a leader, a mentor, or a coach, our opportunity then is to help that person think through for themselves by listening generatively, by listening to help them solve the challenge for themselves. One of the things that we learn in being a thinking environment is that what often stops us most in life is an assumption that in fact is untrue, but we live it as if it's true. And so what generative listening enables us to do is to challenge those assumptions and invite people to think afresh whether the assumption is true, and then replace that with a more liberating assumption. And so if you knew that you could balance your work and home life in a way that works for you, what would you do now? Helping people to liberate their thinking by inviting them to assume something different or challenging an untrue assumption. So coming back to you then, let's take a look at those questions. I wonder, I can't see the comments right now, but I'm just going to wonder whether you answered never, sometimes, or always. The first question I asked around, do you find yourself interrupting others when you feel that you've got the gist of it? Well, what we've observed through many years of noticing what happens when we interrupt others, the brain receives it like an assault, and the blood flows, they stop. And you'll know this example when, for example, you might be saying, "Oh, I've got 3 things I want to share with you." And you share 2 and then I interrupt you and you can't remember what the 3rd one was. That's the impact of interruption. So when you interrupt another, not only does it stop someone in their tracks of what they're thinking and saying and expressing themselves, it also takes them a while to get back on track, if ever. Number 2, do you find yourselves often finishing another sentence because you feel you have a great and deep connection and I know what they're about to say? Well, hey, I used to do that too. You know, knowing my husband really well, I thought, yeah, I know what he's about to say. You know, we connect really well. I understand what he's thinking. I'm able to feel what he's feeling. But what my studies and studying with Nancy Klein revealed is that, you know, for every 30 thoughts that we share out loud, we have 300 in our mind. And so therefore my question is, how could I possibly know that what I'm about to say will be of greater value, or even what my husband in this case would have thought and said himself? So when we think we're doing good by finishing someone's sentence, what we're actually doing is robbing them of the opportunity to think for themselves and express what they truly think and feel. And lastly, are you just waiting to, are you listening, or are you just waiting to speak when they're asked for? But they can be detrimental and discouraging when they're not. In the boardroom, it's often the thing that holds up the most and becomes the most negative impact when people are dishing out opinions rather than supporting others to think well for themselves. So as I begin to wrap this up, I wanted just to leave you with 4 ideas in ways that you can enhance your leadership relationships with those around you. The first of which is to be more interested than interesting, is to give a palpable respect for the person with whom is speaking. Once you've made that commitment to listening to another, my invitation is to give your undivided attention, free of interruption and free of distractions. In fact, a friend of ours, a friend who I've recently connected with through this group is Oscar Trimboli, and he recently said, you know, when we just turn off our digital devices, our ability to listen and give our attention increases by 50%. So number 1, be interested more than interesting, giving your attention with a palpable respect for others. And that means having an open body posture and having an eye contact on the eyes of the person who's speaking, or whatever giving attention is in your culture. Number 2 is to resist that urge to interrupt, to also let people know that you won't interrupt, because once they know they won't be interrupted, the blood will flow more easily in their brain. They'll be able to speak with more fluidity and confidence. So let them know that you'll not interrupt them. And of course, get comfortable with the silence. It's one of the things that people find hard. They want to jump in without giving the person the opportunity to really think and then express themselves. Number 3 is to overcome your intolerance for the unknown. So be open-minded, be willing to learn from those who are different from us. I think Gary mentioned it earlier around celebrating the difference in life, around one of the lovely things about, I say lovely, but one of the things about the Humans First Club, and in fact this environment we find ourselves in now, is that, you know, we are brought together in our uniqueness as human beings. And at the same time, we know that our uniqueness is what brings us to be special and different. And so resisting the urge, or if you like, or overcoming your intolerance to the unknown is about celebrating the difference that we bring. And finally, is to make others feel that they matter. And so what does that mean? It's around taking time to listen. And the wonderful thing about the thinking environment, the paradox is that what we can accomplish in 5 minutes or in 50 minutes is much faster when we give our attention and listen in this way than when we just constantly talk over each other. So give time to one another and apply the opportunity to give your attention and resist that urge to interrupt. And also to be free of the mechanism of judgment. Because when you do that, we know the mirror neurons of empathy emerge afresh. And finally, to appreciate them for a quality that you recognize. Somebody, for example, who showed up at a meeting and for the first time has spoken their thoughts and given some new ideas. And the ideas you may not take forward, but the fact that they've had the courage to speak up would be to acknowledge that, a behavior that you want to see more of in your team. So I'd love to conclude with my message to share with you today that listening is one of the greatest gifts that you can give to another. In my experience, it's the most dignifying way of which we can respect one another as human beings. Mike, I'd love to invite you back in.
Oh, Jane, I was listening very intently and actually taking notes as well. I did pause and look over at the comments, the chat a little bit, but so much of the outcome of that teaching, when we are able to embrace those practices in our lives, the outcomes for ourselves and the impact on others, you've stated so powerfully and eloquently. It if it's an invitation that's hard to resist, right? Because I think we would love to see our relationships flourish, our impact to others be positive and vibrant like that. Um, the ability to see others. I mean, the big waves of inclusiveness and belonging and all of that goodness rolls with that. But you've brought it down to actionable choices. And again, just that growth and learning that we can explore in ourselves. And you've given us 3 simple checkpoints. Go back, how do we answer those questions? And I truly took those to heart. And I had I thought of going never, but I truly couldn't probably answer that to either of them. But I realized that I have matured along that path and become better over time. And so there's growth for all of us in that wonderful teaching. And you bring it to reality for us so clearly. And thank you for that. What a gift you've shared today.
My pleasure, Mike. And so I would love to invite you, is from what you're learning today, what is it that's standing out for you in, that's standing out for you in some of the changes that you would like to see and you hope will be sustained as we reemerge?
The going forward of it, Jane, and so it's that embracing personal growth, which requires vulnerability, right? Because it has to be different than today. So making a decision that's different today than we would have made a month ago or a year ago. And just giving ourselves and each other permission to do that is what I'm really hoping we can take away, that truly expecting better, because I think we can all envision a better world. And now we can actually impact that and make those choices by who we follow and how we engage. And that's my big takeaway here is you've taught us principles that we can put in our daily lives that will change the way we engage with the world, with those closest to us, and with those we haven't met yet. And I think that allows us to let go of a lot of past bad behaviors when we can stay focused on the good things we can do next. And that's my great hope, is our ability to let go and seek out what is obviously better. So thank you for that.
Wonderful. And Mike, I would just love to finish with appreciating you for the commitment that you make, not only to yourself, but to all of us, and raising our game, and the accountability to yourself, to others, in helping making this world a better place.
Thank you very much for that, Jane. You're such a gift, and I can't wait until we get to do this again.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.